All right, let's start. Hello and welcome to Clear Conversations. My name is Garrett Jones and I'm Clear M&C Saatchi's Global Marketing Director. Today's conversation focuses on making sense of the big shopper shift, helping consumer goods and retail brands to find the clarity to grow in 2021, and is presented in partnership with TML Partners. It's great to see some old friends and new joining us from brands like Anheuser-Busch, PepsiCo, Cereal Partners, Nestle, HelloFresh, Kellogg's, PZ Cussons, GSK, in fact, over 200 brands from right around the world. We're also streaming this session live on LinkedIn and YouTube, so a warm welcome to our audience there too. As an attendee, your camera and microphone are automatically off and you will not be able to turn them on, so you can relax. The session is being recorded and we'll be sharing it with attendees and those who couldn't make it today early next week. So watch out for an email from my colleagues Maliki or Gary in your inbox. Over 2,500 marketers attended or watched Clear Conversations last year, and you can check out the recordings on our YouTube channel. Just search Clear M&C Saatchi YouTube and please make sure you subscribe. For more content, events, and to watch recordings of this and other conversations we have, visit clearstrategy.com or follow us at Clear M&C Saatchi on LinkedIn for more updates. Should you wish to ask a question today, please use the Q&A function at the bar at the bottom of your screen and start your question with the name of the panelist you'd like to answer. For example, type Maria and then your question if you'd like to ask Maria a question. Right, with that done, let's get on with the show. So Clear is the strategy consulting arm of M&C Saatchi, and we found ourselves in the thick of helping brands to manage the chaos that the pandemic has brought with it this last year. From future scenario planning to rapid, agile innovation, category strategy to portfolio management, brand repositioning to proposition development, we've been asked to help brands in a number of ways to navigate a path through the choppy waters of marketing strategy this past 12 months. Today's session focuses on shopper behavior and what's happened in the last 12 months, and more importantly, what we think might begin to happen as we exit the pandemic. It's not going to be straightforward or simple. There's more chaos to come. But our firm belief at Clear is that even amongst all of this chaos, the opportunity to change for good has never been greater. Today, our Chief Strategy Officer, Rhonda Hyatt, will share some perspectives on the shopper shifts we've identified before we debate some of the questions raised with our brilliant panel. And I'm delighted to welcome Maria Ellis, who is a top 10 global food and beverage executive with over 20 years of experience in marketing and general management. With a proven track record at Fortune 500 companies, including Coca-Cola, Conagra, and PepsiCo, in 2010, Maria pivoted to work in the private sector for McCain Foods, the 9th largest global food company, and most recently in a role as Vice President and CMO. In this role, Maria shifted the culture from a product-centric focus to an insight and analytic-based approach, putting the customer at the center of every decision, delivering record growth over the past 5 years. So she should have some valuable advice to share today. I'm also delighted to welcome Sue McVie. Sue has worked in a range of commercial and marketing leadership roles for leading FMCG businesses, including United Biscuits, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Vodafone. Since 2012, she has worked for Kerry Foods, part of the $7 billion international Kerry Group, and has held roles with responsibility for areas including consumer marketing, category and shopper marketing, e-commerce, and more. Since 2017, she's worked in general management, and in her current role as DTC director at Kerry Foods, she's responsible for the accelerator businesses within the portfolio, and is also the managing director of Oakhouse Foods within the fast-growing direct-to-consumer space. Again, something fascinating to talk about today. We're finally joined by Wasim Haq. Waz is a global digital leader, passionate about customer experience and enabling this through data, insight, and technology. He's currently head of digital at Morrison's and also board advisor to verified visitors and analysis technology startups. Waz has extensive experience in developing platform, product, and data strategies with the supporting business change to deliver digital transformation and customer value across the consumer, healthcare, travel, and retail businesses. So again, given the shifts in behavior we've seen, Waz should be a fascinating panelist today. And finally, from Clear MC Saatchi, Rhonda Hyatt. Rhonda's our Chief Strategy Officer, and whilst at Clear, she has focused on growing our retail and shopper offer and delivering transformational and clear brand strategy for clients, including Reckitt Benckiser, Philips, Nautica, and Abbott. And prior to joining Clear, Rhonda was head of brand strategy and analytics for Interbrand Design Forum, where she focused specifically on retail and CPG clients. Again, quite helpful. And finally, I'm going to hand over to our friend Emma Calder from TML Partners to introduce a little bit more about today and our partnership.
Thanks very much, Garrett. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Personally, very pleased that you all haven't yet suffered from Zoom gloom or video conference fatigue. So yes, I'm Emma Calder. I work as a senior consultant here at TML Partners. For those of you that don't know, we're an executive search firm who specialise in senior and board level appointments across marketing and communications. And I personally sort of head up the FMCG and retail practice. It's been a really great start to the year for TML Partners. It's really encouraging to see a real increase in sort of client activity around wanting to hire for their marketing teams. I'm personally enjoying, the optimism I think it's actually come in the UK from easing of lockdown restrictions, and I think that in turn is, giving the market confidence. And there are certainly some sort of spring shoots, shall we say, in the job market. So yeah, we're delighted to be continuing our partnership with Clear this afternoon on these webinar events, and I'm really pleased to be a co-host on such a strong panel. So a huge thank you for agreeing to join us this afternoon, Sue, Waz and Maria. So now I'm going to hand over to Rhonda, who's going to set the scene for our conversation this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. We are so excited to jump in. So I will trust that everyone can see my screen, as we are so sick of asking that question. So as we go through today, you might remember from Clear, if this is your first time joining us, you may have missed our last series, which was called From Chaos to Clarity. If you haven't missed it and you're up to speed, definitely this will be a continuation of that conversation. But today we want to look at, as Geraint mentioned, the kind of chaotic environment we're living in. How do we find that clarity? And one of the key aspects of finding that clarity is that shopper shift that's happening and how consumers and shoppers are behaving differently in today's retail environment. So very excited that between our panel with retail and kind of CPG, FMCG represented, we're going to have a very lively discussion. So with that, just to quickly set up the discussion, we will talk very briefly about the methodology and the business question we sought to answer. We're going to talk a bit about harnessing chaos. This will be the data from our report to make sure that we're kind of setting the stage to those shopper shifts, and then we'll get right into the debate in just a couple of minutes. So the business question that we really sought out to answer as a firm was to understand, again, in a complex and chaotic environment, what are the right ways and confident paths to growth that our leaders can achieve? And so we actually went out, and just in the fall of this past year, we spoke to over 700 CEOs, CMOs, and senior marketers across the geographies represented here to really gain their perspective and understand what that future kind of path to growth will look like. As we always like to say, there is no crystal ball. No one can predict to the future for sure, but collectively, we have a lot of expertise, experience, and insights to help point us in the right direction. So as we start to look at really how do we harness this chaos and get into growth, one of the big questions in our survey that we asked, and this is specific to FMCG, CPG, and retail respondents, again, business leaders, what's keeping you up at night? What are the things that you're most worried about as we start of kind of continue into the hopefully last phases of the pandemic? And we broke this out by the different levels. And so there's going to be some interesting story arc that does take place here between what this question looks like and how it relates to the shopper shifts. So from a CEO perspective, you would have seen this in the overarching paper. Creating and managing that valuable data infrastructure is top of the list. It's what's most important to them as they start to think about what are we not prepared for and how do we make sure we're setting ourselves up to be prepared in the future. The other one is knowing how to unlock new marketing channels. That's going to come up in our shopper shifts for sure. And then the third one is how to balance a demand for brand purpose with that commercial performance. As we all know, brand purpose has become a very hotly debated topic and much more omnipresent than it has been in past years. And it's certainly something on our CEOs' minds. As we look at the CMOs, probably not surprising, continuing to be able to prove the ROI and the value of the marketing spend is top of the agenda for our CMOs. And as I'm sure the panel will relate to, that's the how do we show what's working when we don't exactly know what are all the channels and ways in which to communicate with our consumers, because it's kind of this channel explosion that's going on. So we'll debate that one a bit more. The other thing is how to invest across that increasingly complex media mix. And then the final one is how do we stay ahead of the pace of change from a consumer standpoint? And that's going to be very related to our shopper shifts today. The final cut we wanted to look at is the VPs, because of course, the highest levels of the organization has a lot of clarity, but as we move down into the people who are perhaps a bit more responsible for really executing the day-to-day strategy and plan, what's really top of mind is that total customer journey and experience. So from a shopper standpoint, if we're thinking about our path to purchase or decision journey, how do we really unlock the growth across different channels and touch points? And then thinking about a lot of these new marketing channels. I know I keep joking about this Clubhouse that's new. I'm already seeing a lot of strategies popping up from a lot of brands trying it out. So maybe we'll have some insight from the panel on that. And then the last one is thinking about that valuable data infrastructure. So we continue to have this nice tension between the creative and the data and analytics, but also showing up where our consumers are. And that's really the most important point of this conversation. So that's what's keeping everyone up at night. What we wanted to do, and you'll see this in the white paper that is a lot more expanded, but it's to really think about when you're trying to find this path to growth and the clarity, there's not one single path, and time is a very important factor. So you will see this matrix that really helps bring to life the movement of time. So how our world continues to change, that fast pace of change that the CMOs represented, how do we keep a pulse on what those changes are, how they impact our business, and ultimately, what ability do we have to influence over those? Some of the changes that are going to occur are not right for certain brands to actually move on. Some of them are very timely and opportunistic and should move on quickly. So we cut this data by the FMCG or CPG brands, and what you'll see is a lot of these big bubbles here that are really the quick win opportunities are making sure that we're leveraging that social commerce. It's really growing, got a lot of people's attention during the pandemic, but we're also keeping an eye to some of those future impacts that might occur, things like the aging population or income inequality. There's a lot of things out there that we have to kind of make sense of. Similarly with retail, also social commerce, really hot topic for retail, but buy online, pick up in store, and what's the future of that look like and how might it morph going into the future? So we have a lot of that. But what we really want to focus on are what are these shopper shifts? So as we looked across all of the data that we were able to gather through the course of our survey focused on business leaders, we were able to identify these big shopper shifts. And then as we go through each one, you're going to see that we've augmented that with some consumer-facing data to really kind of spur the debate and discussion today. So as we go into those, we're going to cover 4 large shifts. I'm not going to go through these on this slide individually so that we can get right into the discussion as promised, but we will kind of discuss the rounding out of these 4. And then we're going to land on a point around marketing talent, which has been a very interesting finding from our study. And I know our panelists have a lot of really key input and perspective on that. All right, so jumping right in, the first shopper shift that we're seeing is that for years, we've talked about channel blur, we've talked about channel shifting. And what we found during the last course of the year is that actually the perspective is channels aren't shifting, they're essentially morphing. And so for years, we've talked about B2B, B2C, D2C. Actually, it's just 2C. Wherever our customers are, wherever our consumers are, is where we need to be. And so it's stop thinking so much about channel, but really thinking about where they are. And so we have 2 data points here that are quite interesting in that online shopping increased by 50% during the pandemic, perhaps even suggesting, eMarketer suggested that we accelerated by 5 years in terms of our online shopping penetration because of the pandemic. And also during that same time, social commerce really started to explode, seeing nearly 40% growth during the pandemic. So quite a big shift here in how people are actually buying and entering the path to purchase.
Thanks, Rhonda. I'm going to jump in there and ask some questions. Maria, if I can come to you first, how has your business had to adapt to this channel morphing that Rhonda's talking about? I mean, there's lots of stuff going on in this space. What's McCain been having to do about it?
Right. I think, immediately after COVID sort of took hold, there was this moment of sort of stop, assess, and understand, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that, and it was our own experience as well as consumers, that there was this bifurcation of, a massive expansion of retail, obviously, and much of that driven online, as well as delivery. So we think about, obviously, share of stomach. That's not a new concept, but I think what transitioned and really challenged us, frankly, was the fact that, all measured channels, right? Like we have our typical data sources of IRI and Nielsen and very discrete ways to measure. But we had to blow all that up. And again, as Rhonda said, put the consumer at the center. And so while the opportunities were very obvious, sizing, prioritizing, and aligning around those opportunities were the big challenges. So we could see the opportunities, we understood them as consumers, but really galvanizing the organization and almost, we have these very discrete go-to-market channel teams and category teams. We had to fundamentally flip that on its head to get after what we could see happening in the marketplace. And I think that blending data sources was probably one of the most challenging things we did, but most critical to really understand and get that alignment. You saw the disparate perspective between CEO, CMO, and VP level in terms of priorities and goals. And I think that was key really to unlocking what were market opportunities that this data reinforces.
So, Waz, I'm going to come to you next. I mean, we've heard from multiple different people in previous conversations about the sort of initiative creep that happened at the kickoff of the crisis, where there were so many different things you could do. And Maria just touched on that now. How have you advised your startup partners, but also how have you advised Morrison's teams to prioritize, to work out what to do about this channel morphing challenge?
Yeah, I think Maria touched on it. The key thing is to be where your customer wants to be. And, if I take Morrison's example, I wasn't actually at Morrison's at the start of the pandemic, but they did a lot to increase the number of channels that were available, to make Morrison's available on Amazon, Deliveroo, increase its capacity in online, introduce more click and collect slots. So actually, to be there for where the consumer wants it, which was that 50% increase in online shopping, we needed to service that. I think an interesting point actually in Morrison's as well, though, is that what customers were looking for was home delivery. There was a lot that were isolating. There was a lot that couldn't get out, elderly people. And so another channel that was introduced was also doorstep delivery, which was the ability for people to use the phone and ring in their order and their local store would deliver it. So I think that, as a digital advocate, it doesn't always have to be the digital channel. It's about giving a channel that your customer needs based on their current requirements. Saw some shifts in regards to some of the tech business I work with as well. I work with a bot security business, and the number of bots online increased significantly. Some of the activities that some of those bots were taking part in were not quite as nice as they should be, and a bit more malicious, and affecting people's e-commerce journeys, which again is an area that we need to think about as channels shift, is especially online, is what happens for the supporting areas to that, with cybersecurity and data protection and everything else that goes with it as well.
Yeah, it's one of the areas that's not really talked about a huge amount, but that shift to digital brought with it not just all of the benefits, but also a lot of the risks, and a lot of new people having to deal with those risks who perhaps weren't very clear on those risks when they joined the channel, as it were. I'm going to come to you now, Sue. What other shifts have you seen? I mean, you're in a really interesting position. You're running an accelerator. You're sitting there in a MD role of a D2C business. What are the other things you've seen in terms of channels? I mean, from personal experience, I think fruit boxes, the milkman here in the UK has undergone a bit of a renaissance. What else have you seen in terms of channel shifts?
Yeah, I mean, we operate across multiple channels, both from an acquisition perspective, but also from a sales channel perspective as well. So from a sales point of view, I absolutely resonate with Waz's point around introduction of the phone. The telephone's a really key sales channel for us. We service a good chunk of our customers through that channel, and we saw a huge increase in online as a channel for us. And it's an absolute myth that the older generation can't do digital, because they absolutely can. And we saw a huge shift on our sales channel during the pandemic, but also from an acquisition perspective as well. So the lovely thing about running a D2C business is that you have fantastic data and you're able to really unpick that data to get a very good lens on the whole customer experience, right the way from acquisition right through to, you know, advocacy, if you like. And we definitely saw some shifts in our acquisition channels. I mean, we use a portfolio of channels, from traditional press, inserts, TV for scale, to sort of digital PPC channels to help us acquire customers. And what we noticed as a key change when the first sort of lockdown hit, if you like, is that rather than distinct channels, being able to measure distinct channels' performance directly, we were seeing that some of those channels which were bankers in terms of customer acquisition changed into having more of a halo effect on other channels. So TV was a great example. When I look at my marketing effectiveness measures on TV, you know, you'd look at it on its own, you'd say, don't invest, because I can see the direct customer acquisition coming from that channel. But we've had a good go at our attribution model, over the last 6 months or so. And we can see that gives us a really great halo effect on channels like digital, which are highly effective. So for us, I think your question is spot on around the morphing of these channels. We had to shift from being, you know, very, very solar channel centric to really omni-channel in the way that we look at our marketing investment in terms of acquisition.
Yeah, it's really pushed things at a pace, hasn't it? This pandemic. I think that the number of people I've spoken to have said, "Oh, we've sort of dabbled in omni-channel up until now, and now we are fully omni-channel as of 3 weeks ago." You know, the number of conversations we had at the beginning of the pandemic, it was crazy. I mean, one of the best illustrations of this, I think, going back to another conversation we had last year, we had Abigail Posner on from Google, from the Google brand unit, and she told this story about a retail client of theirs who had rung up, I think 3 or 4 days after this all really kicked in, and went, have you got any data that we can use to really understand shopping behavior? Because we're getting a bit concerned that we're not covering all of our consumer shopping needs as well as we could be, given the real shifts we're seeing in terms of sort of complaints through our customer service centre. And so they went back to their search data, and the search data for this particular retailer, which I won't name, it's not fair, but they were seeing huge numbers of people asking, how do I do curbside pickup at retailer X? Do they do doorstep delivery at retailer X? How do I shop online at retailer X? And sort of Google then provided an enormous amount of data to them, but then support to turn around some really quick changes to the way in which their sites were structured, their search was structured, their search engine marketing was built out to actually respond quickly to the crisis. But I'm going to move the conversation on a bit and just come to you, Rhonda, about what happens next. It's a bit of a mean question, but we all feel, particularly here in the UK, now that we've got a roadmap to the 21st of June, we all feel it's going to change again in about 4 months' time, 100 days, I think. So what do we see in terms of further dramatic shifts as we come back to in-person in a big way? What do you see happening? How are we balancing up that sort of hybrid channel setup?
Yeah. I think all of our panelists have given some fantastic insight around making sure that you are really close to the consumer and not being afraid to look at data or information in a different way, really kind of blowing up some of those models, thinking about how you serve even your internal ways of working and starting to think about it differently and ask the right questions. You know, going back to that point that the CEOs made, the top thing for them is about data infrastructure. And what that means is that all of the data that we do have access to is flowing through the organization and making its way to the right people and bubbling up the right insights that will inform those strategies. That's so critical, and actually serves as a really nice segue into our next topic, which is that people in these different channels and different ways of engaging with retailers and products and brands have really spurred up a lot of new needs, new products, new expectations, and new relationships. And so some of the things that we're really starting to see, and this was some very interesting data, is that this particular firm looked at consumables from February of 2020 to March of 2020 and saw that shot up by 200%. None of us are surprised because we all know that everybody went into that kind of stock up lockdown mentality. But the interesting data point is that of those people, nearly half of them who had purchased a brand or product for the first time actually made a second purchase. And so what you're seeing is this has really been a catalyst for a way for brands and products to come into people's homes and come into their lives in a really accelerated moment and time frame. The key, though, is how do you hold on to that? And that was one of the things you remember we saw in the CMO data, is how do we hold on to that lasting relationship, or even the first start of our relationship? How do we hold on and really start to make sure that that moment of growth or explosion of growth we saw during the pandemic isn't a one-hit wonder, a flash in the pan? It's something that does have sustainable advantage potentially for us. So Grant, would love to hear from the panel on that topic.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating one. I mean, Maria, I'm going to come to you because you've built a career, at least in the recent past, on kind of transforming a business into an insight-led, customer-focused business. So how have you really tracked and understood and actioned these new shopper needs, new expectations, new relationships that they have with the brand through the crisis at speed?
Right. And, I think I can speak to some of the work that our Canadian partners at McCain have done, because I think they've done a fantastic job at it. It is the art and science of mining the data. Honestly, I think back maybe 10 years ago, I talked about marketing by numbers, and that, back then the big trend was all around demand spaces. But now I think really understanding that data, and I think there's actually an interesting side conversation about the data is flowing into the organization in so many different places, and who owns that story about the consumer, because supply chain and e-commerce team is percolating up headlines about what's happening. So I think that's a whole nother topic that maybe it's a future series, but it's an interesting one. But so the science is there on how to track the customer and consumer journey. But the art is how to connect with their hearts. So it is the head and the heart. And our Canadian team has done such an amazing job at McCain, really connecting with the hearts. In some ways, the pandemic created a real challenge for category leaders, because it was an opportunity it really leveled the playing field for all brands to have a window of opportunity to connect with consumers. And so really maintaining your category leadership, it was directly correlated to your supply chain at that point, but connecting with their values, and at the same time, you're really managing that digital journey and the shopper journey. You're also connecting with them on a values base. And I think, whatever that platform is, you have to own it and you have to nurture it and continue to tell that story over and over again.
Yeah, we saw at the beginning of the whole crisis, I'm sorry to remind anyone who works for one of these brands who's in the audience, but we saw a slew of identikit adverts across the world, which had the same piano track, broadly the same set of stock video footage, and the same message, which was said, we're all in this together and we're in it with you, brand X. So I'm going to come to you now. On that basis, the power of creativity, what Maria's talking to there is how you connect creatively with your audience and build something more tangible than just the sort of the kind of experience layer. How important has that been for Kerry Group as a whole, for Kerry Foods, but also for the Oak House Foods business?
Yeah, it's super important. I mean, if I use Oak House as a bit of an example, we've spent quite a bit of time over the last 6 months or so really looking at our segmentation and defining, who are our customers, and we've done it from data back, which is quite unusual. My background is all fairly traditional marketing, and you'd start with a pen portrait and then you'd size the segment and off you go. But the way that we do it is we use the data to create the segments to identify common behaviours, and then you need to get really great root cause understanding of that segment. So an example would be, for our loyal customers, for example, when the first wave of the pandemic hit last year, we have a very active dialogue with them. The most important thing for them was securing their food supply. There was mass panic. I think we saw it in lots of different categories, lots of different retailers. It all went a bit crazy. So that enabled us to treat that segment differently. So we opened up advanced ordering for that loyal group of customers. We gave them priority over certain slots. When certain rounds were filling up, we closed them to new customers and made sure that loyals could take advantage. We set up a repeat order service and those kind of things. So we have a really active dialogue with our customer base. They love to give you feedback as well, which is brilliant. I don't think I've ever put so many surveys out and had so much feedback so quickly. My customer base are absolutely brilliant. So we have a really active dialogue with them direct. We use a lot of hot jar surveys on our online. We have an active and national franchise network that we have a really regular dialogue in and out. So we're able to flow insights, requirements up and down the organisation quite quickly. And I think that's enabled us to act quickly during the last 6 months or so.
That's super interesting. I think, well, I'll come to you next if you don't mind. I think I'm interested in your perspective on this, coming from a digital background. You know, how are you seeing how this sort of pivot to data that so many marketers have been forced to do to understand how to really address and manage the experience? How are you seeing that playing out as we move into a sort of that digital hybrid physical environment that we sort of heard Rhonda talk about earlier?
Yeah, I think what's interesting in both what Maria and Sue said then is to listen to the customers and its customer insight and what data can give you as a voice of the customer through the whole customer journey. And in a hybrid way, it's a mix of both, you know, quant data from the e-commerce experiences that people are on, from the data flow of their journeys that they're taking, but then also it's the qual back on getting that feedback, speaking to your customers. In Morrison's case, speaking to our colleagues that are in store, because they're some of the closest people to our customers. And then how do you bring all of that data together to get a single view of that customer and a single voice of that customer across that customer journey? That then enables you to introduce new products, introduce new services, introduce new experiences that meet each of those customer needs. And I think a big thing when you look at the companies that have been successful through the pandemic, I think is that willingness to change and willingness to act fast and do something. I've heard with the examples there from Maria and Sue. It's the ones where, you know, a company has done something about it, as opposed to maybe staying with their original plan that they had. No one had a plan this year or last year, as it was. If you weren't willing to change your plan, you weren't going to be successful.
Yeah, we've had a couple of interesting questions from the audience that I'm just going to tap into quickly here. So we've had a particularly interesting one on the D2C conundrum, which I hope you've perhaps seen. I think the question is, how did you make D2C work commercially? Because actually this person's costings for chilled delivery were prohibitive and the project was halted. Do you have any guidance for somebody who's trying to engage with a clear need with a new experience, but is running into particular challenges like this one?
Yeah, so there's two things that you need to really focus on to get a D2C to work. And I know some people have struggled with it, and it's maybe because they don't pay enough attention to these two metrics, but the two killer metrics are what it costs you to get a customer and the lifetime value of that customer. So you can spend a fortune acquiring as long as your lifetime value more than covers that, generally 3 times over. So what you need to make sure is whatever product or service you're putting together, your model is sticky enough, because if somebody buys your product once and never buys it again, you generally wouldn't make too much money on that first order because of your acquisition cost. But if you can get the repeat strong enough, then you can make your model work. And so there's lots of good examples out there at the moment where, you know, people are spending huge amounts of money on acquisition. They haven't made a cent yet because their proposition is not sticky enough from a consumer point of view. So I would say be really, really boringly focused on those two metrics. They're the two things that keep me awake at night. And if you can get those two right, then you'll have a decent model.
Yeah, we always say you live and die by your repeat, you know, your product experience. That,
yeah, right.
You know, I think that's so true. It always has been, and it always will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's hugely valuable advice. I think the other question here is around sort of misperceptions, I guess. I think one of the things I heard from a lot of my old retail consulting clients at the beginning of the crisis was this concern that average basket value was going to drop like a stone as a result of everything moving online, particularly for things like top-up shops or sort of stuff that we would have done on an impulse in a kind of in an impulse channel or in a local kind of mini supermarket. Whereas there's a question in here, which is when I shifted my business online, I found a 20% increase in basket value for online baskets. And given Rhonda's statistics from the slide earlier, are you seeing this dynamic as well? Are you seeing a different basket mix? Are you seeing some of that stuff come through?
I think we are. I think that the difficulty with this question is it may not be a channel switch, it might be a shopper switch. So, you know, in grocery, customers didn't want to go to the supermarket as often through the pandemic, and therefore one big online shop would be different to potentially popping into the supermarket on the way home from work. You know, that I think that behavioural change. I saw the question from Anthony. I'm not sure what category he's in to actually know, is it to do with the channel switch that's influenced that, or is it because of him being in a certain category, which is just that the shopper has changed their shopping behaviours in that category, and may well go back to their old shopping behaviours as we come out of COVID. And I think that's going to be the interesting piece for the future is how will that evolve.
Yeah, I think there's going to be, on that point, some really fascinating comparative data that we're going to be able to play with, sort of 22 versus 2021, I think, because you're going to find a place where you can see actually which of these things really are now here to stay, which of these things have kind of blended and morphed, and actually we want to engage that behavior because it was beneficial to us as a business and to the consumer, or put it the other way around, beneficial to the consumer first and then to us as a business. But then there will be things.
Can I add on that, Geraint, if that's okay? I think there might be a swing back as well. I think, you know, we've all been locked up in houses in isolation. It's kind of we'll get let out, we'll all go out, we'll go back into our previous shopping journeys and enjoy all that experience. And then it may well be we go, actually, I prefer the online one. And almost the swing comes back. So it's probably going to be a bit of a pendulum for a little bit of a while as well until it balances somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it'll mean we have to continue looking at the data and also understand pent-up demand. So Rhonda, I'm going to come to you to take us to the next shift.
Yep, exactly. That's a fantastic transition again. And the next big thing is about pent-up demand. And, you know, we've talked a lot about how the pandemic has not been the same experience for everyone. You know, some people have been hit a lot harder. Some people have not been affected nearly as much at all. And actually, McKinsey did a nice study that really broke down the different types of socioeconomic breaks to show how the pandemic and what's important and where this potential pent-up demand might come from. But the point that we want to make here is that pent-up demand does exist in some capacity, perhaps a bit different for each person, but that's leading to a lot of discovery of new categories and new products that people wouldn't have potentially had before, and then rediscovery of actually going back to things that perhaps they were doing out of home. So a lot of kind of, you know, more eating out for dinner, or perhaps insourcing things like household cleaning and that type of thing. And all of a sudden, not doing those things anymore, you had to rediscover the category or rediscover your relationship with those products. If any of you have tried to purchase a new kitchen machine that could include an air fryer or even a dishwasher recently, you'll know that supply chain is not able to keep up. Everything's on back order. And that's because kitchens and machines did grow by 99% during the pandemic, washing machines by 46%. One interesting fact on that is that people are now not just searching for washing machines, they're searching for hygienic washing machines. So again, you're looking for those new needs in a category that I'm now discovering again or rediscovering, and even something like espresso machines to replace those daily Starbucks runs. We're starting to see a lot of those out of home occasions come into the home. And I think Wasim, you made a perfect, corollary here, because we brought this stuff in home. And then when it comes back and it's open, we're going to go running back out of home to get those experiences. But there's probably some leveling out to do where people understand that perhaps some of it in home is okay now, and I have a balance of out of home. So definitely want to hear from the panel here about what you all are seeing within your categories.
Absolutely. Maria, I think this new family and at-home behavior sort of structure, I mean, we're going to do a panel on family later in the year, just for the audience listening. We're going to do something, I think, in May, maybe in April. But these demand spaces that have appeared in terms of family behavior as a result of us all being at home together, do you see some of these persisting? How are you preparing for some of those that won't persist? How important is insight right now for keeping you on the edge of what's going to happen next?
Yeah, it's incredible. I think we, at McCain and in our focus on consumers and putting them at the center of everything, some of the consumers are saying in some aspects of their lives, there's no way they can go back to pre-pandemic sort of rituals. It's this notion of being on autopilot and the frantic pace that consumers were living, and really sort of redefining what the reality looks like. So I think that's, now which aspects actually stick and which aspects morph. For our business, what we've seen in terms of having a view of, food away from home and food at home, I think Rhonda is great that there is no more B2B, B2C, it is 2C. And so what we're seeing is, more blended eating occasions. So a multi-sourced, so you may, order a pizza from, your local pizza joint, prepare some appetizers or snack tidbits that you had gotten from the grocery store. And, here in the US, club stores are big. You got your soda from the club store. So I think, sort of the complexity of the sourcing will continue because consumers have sort of tried on multiple different models. And now, they're going to optimize around what works for them. And another thing I wanted just to mention quickly is that because access to the information and amalgamating it together to get a complete picture is so important, we found really good success in terms of working with our customers who have data as well and partnering, so where data sources were sort of, a hard stop, whether it would be Walmart or, whatever retailer, because of the pandemic, it actually opened up, a lot of dialogue about how do we get a better picture and work collaboratively together. So I think that's a real opportunity for folks on this call to think about is, hard and fast rules, whether you're a consumer or a customer, we can bend those rules and think outside the box. But for sure, consumers are going to optimize around what creates value for them, and it's going to be not linear.
Yeah, let's talk about what consumers are going to focus on next, because we talk in our Chaos to Clarity report about the sort of the seismic and sort of large systemic shifts that are going to dominate the discourse for the next 10 years that marketers are going to have to worry about and plan for today, tomorrow, next week, next year, and over the next 3 or 4 years. One of those is clearly going to be sustainability because it's on the agenda of the man now sitting in the White House. Apparently it's on the agenda of the man now sitting in number 10 Downing Street. It's on the agenda of many, many world leaders. And it's also seen as a potential panacea economically to some of the issues that's been caused by the pandemic. So how are you investing, Sue, to support and embed sort of changed beneficial behaviours like a focus on sustainability? Are you looking at new research? Are you looking at new sort of delivery mechanisms? Are you looking at new channels? How are you doing that?
I think one of the reasons that sustainability is a hot topic is that it's no longer a nice to do, it's a hygiene factor. And you kind of have to be sustainable in what you're doing. What's really interesting for us, I mean, in terms of my business and my area, I'm trying to understand what my customers want, and then I'll invest in creating it. So there's lots of things that we could do to make ourselves even more sustainable. Nobody's ever finished that journey, I don't think. But the key thing for me is really understanding what customers want. And the most important thing to my customer group for meals at the moment is recyclable trays. It's not sexy, it's not particularly different, but that's what's in their mind. So that's where my effort and energies are going to go, is making sure we deliver that as well as we possibly can. We're looking at our fleet, whether we can move to more an electric fleet. How can we bring in a green angle to our delivery? We don't use lots of cardboard. We don't use a lot of disposable, insulation or anything like that to deliver, because it's a human delivery proposition that we have. So we don't have a lot of the sort of the packaging challenges, I suppose, around the product. But the most important thing to my customers is their trays, and that's what we're really focusing on and delivering on.
Waz, are you looking at ways to look at these sort of other beneficial behaviours? So let's sort of have sustainability and look at others that are kind of seen as potentially valuable to consumers. As we're all struggling with potentially reduced spending power, are you looking at ways in which to create different types of proposition, different ways to shop efficiently? What is it that you're looking at in terms of this sort of pent-up demand piece around, helping people to get access to the things they both know they need and want now, but also that they feel like they've learned to need during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is that I think people are becoming a lot more local, and Morrison's actually have a big local strategy so that the offering in supermarkets is relevant to that. But with that, people want to give back and have kind of met their community and want to give back to their community. So we're looking at the way that we can enable people to do that more. And be shown to be giving back into their communities. So it might not be a specific product need, but it's actually a change in way people are thinking. I think Maria said that it's like off the treadmill. So what does off the treadmill mean, and what are people now thinking about? And then from a demand point of view, the fact that we're all working from home more, does that mean that we're actually all going to have more time to scratch cook? And therefore, this trend that came with baking and people cooking, we will get a bit bored of it. We might want to go out when all the restaurants go out, but actually is the ingrained behavior going to be that people do cook more meals because it's enjoyable for people to cook, and they've got a bit more time to do it if they're not commuting every day. So there comes some of the areas that we're seeing and looking at.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting challenge how we kind of look at these different things that are likely to impact as we move from this current phase into a slightly more normalized phase, but in a very different world as a result. Rhonda, I think I'm going to come to you now to sort of take us to the final shift around category management, the shift from that to actually consumer management. I think it sort of wraps things up nicely.
Yep. Thanks, Grant. And I think everyone sort of talked about this in a certain way, but if we think about, and Maria, you hit on this with the kind of the relationships with the retailers, it's always been about who's the category lead and who has the kind of category management experience, and how are we thinking about maximizing those categories. And I think the last big shift we see based on everything we've discussed around looking at the data differently and all of the different changing behaviors and shopper journeys is making that shift from category management to really getting as close as possible to be about consumer management. We have a lot more data now to understand those different channels and journeys and what are the dominant pathways through. So thinking more about how do we maximize that relationship with the consumer, regardless of what the brand neighborhood looks like, or regardless of the retailer of where they're purchasing. And one of the things that we actually pulled out again from our study from that business leader perspective is the biggest challenges facing marketers in the next 5 years is first and foremost sustaining that growth incurred during the pandemic. So that's what you're seeing there, understanding those changing customer needs, and then reacting to post-pandemic market dynamics, which I know we just touched on briefly. But when you start to think about the consumer, the competitive environment, the go-to-market environment, having that shift from let's not just think about our traditional channels, let's not just think about our category at large, but really getting tight with our consumer and building that relationship. Sometimes we're going to win, sometimes we're not going to win. But back to the point that Sue actually made around that customer lifetime value, when you shift that thinking from the here and the now and the day-to-day category performance to really more of that long-term size of prize with an individual consumer, that's really where the shift has to occur and start to find new paths to growth. So definitely back to the panel for their great expertise on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to come to you, Maria. I mean, as you said, there are sort of portfolio shopping things going on here where people are buying certain parts of their meal from different areas. I myself, I'm probably never going to buy craft beer from a supermarket ever again. Sorry, Waz, because I can now go direct to my favorite breweries and try them out and have them delivered to my doorstep, which is horrific for my waistline, but wonderful for my ability to cross-shop the category. Anyway, as you compete for spend with different brands or different products, different services that weren't traditionally in your competitive set, how do you have a category vision strategy? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. But I think absolutely. I think it is about understanding how, if you have a laser focus on who your core consumer is, and not just obviously in the demographic sense. I think this is, actually, I think what Clear Strategy does incredibly well. And no one asked me to say that, but it was my experience at McCain. And where if you truly understand the beliefs of your consumer and what guides them and what's important to them, and then you intersect the data to understand, okay, how does that translate to the shopper dynamic? How does that translate to the food away from home dynamic, and layer on that quantitative understanding, I think that's really the key, because, organizations can really galvanize around the story of a consumer need. I think that's the beauty of it, that if you're really clear about who you want to own and what you want to mean to your consumers, an organization will rally around that because it's a story that everyone can relate to. And then if you quantitatively understand how that relates to your category management strategy, what you're doing for the category and your retail partners, and incrementalizing the pie, how that relates to your, total category approach, I think that's the key.
So last question before we go on to talk about talent. Sue, I'm going to come to you. There's clearly going to be an issue with time, as in, I have too much of it right now. Don't tell my boss, who's probably on. But I have too much of it in the evenings at sort of 10 o'clock at night to sit on my phone and buy things and spend time thinking about what I'm buying and doing the whole cross shop of different channels because it's easy and because I'm bored to tears. I've finished Netflix. I haven't got anything else to worry about. So why not do some shopping in different ways? My question to you is, surely that's going to disappear up in a puff of smoke because our lives are going to reaccelerate back up to 150,000 miles an hour. And are we going to go back to this place where actually we're all going to be competing for a smaller slice of the time? It's not about share of wallet, it's share of time to justify why we should stay part of the shopping repertoire. Is that something that you see coming from a D2C perspective in particular?
I think there will be a change post-COVID, no question. But I do think that what COVID has done is accelerate some behaviour that was happening anyway. And people have learned some new habits during this time. I read a really interesting McKinsey study where they were saying that about 75% of people have shopped differently during this pandemic, but 75% of them think that they will stay. So you could say, okay, so of your new customers that you've acquired, you could probably assume you're going to keep about half of them. And then the question becomes, I really love this shopper shift because for me, it is all about managing the consumer rather than category. So we never talk in our business about how many meals we sell. We talk about how many customers we serve because we're in the business of selling relationships. And therefore, the development in our business now is to say, okay, we've got this deep-rooted understanding of this consumer. How do we pivot our business into new category adjacencies? So I don't think people are going to be constrained by the category that they're currently in. They're going to look at that consumer. And as Maria said, use that really deep-rooted insight and understanding to help pivot you off into different spaces. So I do think a good chunk of this behaviour will stick. Some of it obviously won't, but
yeah, I'm in full agreement. I'm just going to be fascinated to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Rhonda, should we just have a bit of a chat about talent?
Yes, let's have a chat about talent, because one of the things that has come up across this entire discussion is that there's a lot of not only changing consumer behaviors, but brands, retailers, CPGs, manufacturers have had to adapt their ways of working and really repurpose a lot of talent. I know there was a question in the box about agility, which we'll come on to kind of in the closing statement, but having to really pivot, and not only pivoting to understand how to show up at these moments, but do we have the right skill sets? And so if you read the full white paper, been along this journey of From Chaos to Clarity, you will know that one of the frightening things that we found in the study is that the junior marketers don't have their eyes set on the CMO role. And there's a variety of reasons why. We're going to do a much bigger deep dive into the summer. But what we'd love to hear from the panel, and Grant, I know you have a couple of questions to target at this, is when we think about the skills necessary to really set up and deliver for this future growth, what do we need to really think about the changing landscape of the talent profile inside organizations?
Emma, I'm going to come to you directly on that. You've been sitting there very calmly and collectively. Tell us about the talent map that you're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I guess the first thing that occurs to me just on the point on your slide really is on talking to lots of CMOs and business leaders is how very broad shouldered they need to be these days. They've had to upskill themselves hugely. So across their careers, particularly around sort of digital marketing. They also have to be brilliant influencers in order to be able to sell in their ideas and their strategies really to get to the rest of the board, to get them to agree to invest in the new areas and new skill sets to keep up with the new technologies and trends that are happening across marketing. And I think, you know, sort of further down to the organization, I suppose what occurs to me as well is obviously sort of maybe marketing as a career for those that are coming out of university is maybe not as an appealing option as it used to be, or where they are actually coming into marketing careers, maybe they're going to startup organizations, and in those startup organizations you have broad skills is what's actually so required in the smaller businesses. So they'll get quite generalist marketing skills and a bit of experience in all the areas and working in a very speedy sort of startup manner. But as those companies grow and develop and become sort of scale ups, there's a different skill set which is actually required. And those skill sets I'm seeing when I'm talking to those scale up organizations at the moment, they're needing those skill sets that come generally from the bigger blue chip organizations. So I guess there's a sort of a skills gap depending on the size of the organization you're in. Your needs will sort of change. So I think, you know, the big sort of challenge that I can see is, you know, that the CMO has a much broader team than they ever used to, and you know, you have to be sort of you know, have some knowledge across all areas. And in some organizations, what we're kind of seeing is almost like a disaggregation of the CMO role into having sort of VPs and specialist departments, which can work to some degree, but there's also the watch out that you can end up with a non-cohesive marketing strategy and ending up working in silos or having sort of blurred lines of responsibilities.
You can see Maria nodding away. I know you've got some strong opinions on this, Maria.
Well, first of all, I'm kind of a talent junkie because I mean, it's really how you achieve scale in an organization is, you know, is really building that strong and diverse team. So it's a place I'm particularly passionate about. And, you know, we talked about at McCain about the notion of T-shaped marketers. So that is the idea that you know, the various facets of marketing, the marketing discipline, whether it's all the way from insight all the way to customer marketing or shopper marketing across that continuum, to be conversant in that. However, and then having a strong rooted core competency, if you will, in one particular discipline. And so whether that's innovation or, you know, base brand business, but you know, what I'm seeing is a much greater degree of specialization within marketing, to Emma's point. So, you know, and also for my own personal development, I spent the last 3 years tagging along with my integrated marketing lead so that I did not grow up in the digital era. We did big carpet bomb campaigns with CRPs and TRPs to really, you know, do the heavy lifting. That is not the world today. And actually, I find it far more interesting and far more measurable. So, but I had to really up my game in that digital space, which was fun, but certainly a learning journey. But there's all this specialization, whether it's UX, SEO optimization, data science and analytics, all the way through just specialization of knowing your customers. And so at the same time, you absolutely need someone to keep track of the whole. So all these bits and pieces are specialization is happening, but I think you need a real GM sort of operational marketing ops sort of support talent team. And those folks are really hard to find. I think that can understand enough of the specialization to knit it into a holistic strategy so that all the plates are spinning properly. So I think it's an awesome time to be a marketer because there's so much variety, but it is definitely, to your point, the role is getting broader and more complex.
That's a lovely point to wrap on. I think, Rhonda, I'm going to come back to you just to finish up. But what I find really interesting is that this T-shaped marketer thing is now finally hitting the agency world, where we have, in effect, a T-shaped marketing group. I mean, the M&C Saatchi group, of which we're part, has recently launched its new strategy. And it is this idea of having the breadth of skills across our global organization, uniting those into a way that allows clients to really engage with it, but then having the specialisms that go super deep, super narrow, really, to allow us to jump in and fix as is required. And I think it's driving behavior change, both in the structure of the agencies and the way that they work, as well as in the teams that are built inside the organizations that we work with. So Rhonda.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. This has been a fantastic discussion. I think, just to continue the analogy around the T-shape, when we think about the growth framework, the top of the T, everybody's top of the T needs to marry together to really rally around that growth ambition. And that's the most important thing, is to have absolute clarity across everybody. And then it's about using your specialisms and really flexing the muscle and looking at things differently, whether that's data, whether it's your consumer, whether it's your partners, whether it's your retail channels, to really identify how do we move at the speed of the market. And that's why these boxes around quick wins, strategic moves, and transformative bets are so critical, to have that clarity on what's right for your organization and what's not. And then to the last point, a lot more depth in the white paper on this, but that adaptability, having the infrastructure to allow the data to fluently flow through the organization, whether it's coming in from supply chain, whether it's coming in from marketing, but that really unified voice and being hypercritically focused on the consumer gives you the ability to be agile and adaptive and actually know the right pivots to make at the right time. So you sort of can't have one without the other. It's very much a chicken and egg type of thing. So I think as we start to look to the future and continue to monitor these shifts, setting up that information and having that ear to the ground and hyper focus on the consumer will definitely be one of the most sure paths to growth that we can know at this point in time.
Thank you, Rhonda. That's a lovely way of wrapping things up. So I'm just going to say thank you to our fabulous panel, Maria Ellis, Sue McVie, Wasim Hack, and Emma Calder. And also a huge thank you to our partners, TML, who we wouldn't have been able to do this without them. And just one last plug from me before we all finish up. Please join us next week on the 10th of March for my interview with Tom Fishburne, the Marketoonist. You'll find details about that on our website and also all over our LinkedIn channel. Anyway, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have you on board for today's Clear Conversation, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.